Hello, Petal. How you doing? How's it going? So, I think we've decided unanimously, we've decided that Flying Dutch will be the next book that we do, which will be awesome because I freaking love it. I would tell you the drama I've had about trying to get a particular book by Robin Hobb that has been recommended to me by one of our incredible listeners. But the first one went awry because apparently my post office cannot deliver anything when it's raining. It's been a thing for 10 years. I think I've whiffled on about it before. But this time they said they've delivered it here, but they've delivered it at the next village. All the way over there. And I'm like, how can you get that wrong? How can you get that address wrong? Somebody's being a bit cheeky here. They didn't want to come down this side just to give themselves a bit of an earlier finish. I mean, I get that. That's fine. Why don't you just say, can you come and pick it up? I'll be like, fine, no problem. I'll do it next time in town. That's no worries. I don't mind doing that. So I'm a bit annoyed about it. But then I get the second one today that I've ordered off a different supplier. I get it today. Next day delivery. Can't fault that. Well delivered by the delivery guy. What happens? It's freaking water damaged down the entire spine. Now, I'm not having that. And bearing in mind, the first place I got it from, I did it to kind of like cut down on CO2 emissions because they've got that whole commitment to that sort of stuff, which is awesome. But when I told them I was getting in touch with Royal Mail to sort it out, they were so condescending. They were like, have you checked with your neighbour? I'm a grown adult. Of course I've checked with my mother-loving freaking neighbour. I've checked with my mother-loving freaking neighbour. I've looked at my ring cams back and front doors. Thank you very much. I was in all day, and not one person has knocked on the door today to deliver anything. So if you don't mind, next time you do a response as customer services, please read the email. I know you're busy. It was a lot more catty and sardonic than that, but you see, the thing is, people mistake my niceness or kindness for weakness, which is a mistake that most people make around the world about most people. But my bayek is I can be a snide little so-and-so when it comes down to doing a snotogram. Seriously. I've been whiffling on about this for 2.5 minutes. That's just antisocial. So let's just talk about what's really good this week. What's really good this week, obviously, is chatting on with everybody. I've got 2 emails to respond to, which I'm very grateful for. So that's all really awesome. I'm just trying to think of what other awesome stuff's been happening. I'm getting new shelves, because I'm rock and roll that way. But the food this week that I'm really into is going to be really daft. You know those cream crackers that come in an orange packet and they're really nice? Just the plain ones. Just them with some like butter flavoured margarine, like, you know, and a bit of dairy-free cheese and some tomato relish. That's my thing of the week. I'm just really going into crackers. Just a couple of them. Right, I'm going to get off that now. As ever, if you can stand how electrifyingly dull my life is. I'm so sorry. I've got some other book mail as well, but you probably not. Like, I'll tell you about that another point. So I'm laughing at myself. I have to give me head a shake. So I didn't ask in the first instance, and I should have done. How are you doing? Are you doing okay? Let me know in the comments how things are, how life's been, or drop me a line by email because I always like that, even though I can be a bit late replying sometimes. So apologies, but. As ever, if you could hit the like button if you enjoy this content, which today probably is a bit on the line, and share, subscribe, notification bell, all that malagles that keeps us ticking over in the algorithm. Not that I get any benefit out of it, it just kind of keeps us kind of like going and chugging along. So my lovely beans, my absolutely lovely beans, are you sitting comfortably? Is everything nice? We got your cup of tea and your cup of coffee or your soda pop? Got everything? Right, then we shall begin. Chapter 20, the final chapter of Here Comes the Sun by our beloved... I think it's the final chapter. Hold on, let me just double check. Because it's only 12 pages. It's the last chapter. Oh my goodness. Right. Chapter 20 of Here Comes the Sun by our beloved, exalted Mr. Thomas Holt. All right, said the wall. You win. Staff nodded and opened his eyes.
I'm listening,
he thought.
Can we do this the easy way? Because I've had a hard day, and burning bushes or anything like that really would not be a good idea.
And then there was a flash, and a cloud of foul-smelling yellow smoke, and a buzzing sound, like all the flies in all the kitchens of all the transport cafes in the whole wide world.
Stubborn, aren't you?
Said a voice from the chair opposite.
I expect you're going to insist on visual interface as well. Afraid so? Yes. More fool you then.
And another flash, red this time, and the chair was full of a huge scarlet figure, with horns at one end, cloven hooves at the other, and a sour look somewhere in the middle.
What a bloody pantomime the whole thing is, it said. The dressing up, I mean. You've no idea how uncomfortable this get-up is, especially when it's hot. Do you think we could have the window open?
I don't think it does open, actually.
Don't you believe it, the apparition replied, and a crash of broken glass from behind the Venetian blind proved its point. Confirming your guess, it continued. Doppelganger, devil's advocate, at your service. Staff nodded.
Thought so,
he said.
Who was the other chap, by the way? I quite liked him.
Ganger shrugged. Oh, that was me. I have a dual personality, you see.
I see,
Staff replied.
Like finance and general purposes, you mean?
Ganger nodded. Exactly, he replied. It's one of the few real executive perks there is, and you don't have to declare it on your tax return. At least, I don't, he added. Staff rubbed his chin thoughtfully.
But of course,
he went on,
the ganger I've been running about with... Oh, I see. Your double, your double. Oh, very clever. He's just a tiny part of you, like the tip of the iceberg or something.
Ganger moved his head slightly in confirmation. It's a staff-saving exercise, he said. We're really hot on that in our department. Instead of having lots of different members of staff, you see, we just have the one. But I'm flexible. I spread myself thinly, you know.
Lots of different hats, you mean?
Some with holes in them, some not. Ganger replied smoothly. We call it going corporate, but that's just a term of convenience.
I see,
said Staff.
So why you?
Someone has to do the audit, Ganger replied. And I suppose we're naturally typecast for the role of auditors, aren't we? Staff allowed himself a brief smile. We remain separate entities, Ganger continued, even though we work for the same main boss, and if your lot are way off course, we have to give you a helping hand now and then. Unfortunately, from your point of view that is, we can't help introducing a little devilment. Ganger scowled. That's supposed to be a joke, I suppose, he said. Do you want me to write it down, or do you trust me just to remember it?
So we're way off course,
Staff said quietly.
I thought so. It's all to do with him, you know, finance and...
Mainly, Ganger said carefully. But your lot helped. Believe me, they really did. Some of them have a real natural talent for...
Yes,
Staff interrupted.
I dare say they do. That's administration for you.
He stopped briefly and his brow wrinkled.
Hold on, though,
he said.
I thought you told me you weren't a... or at least a little bit of you, I knew as Ganger wasn't a... that he was sort of, co-opted. That's why I was so keen to try and introduce mortals, you see. Because you said you tried it and it worked.
Oh, absolutely, Ganger replied. We do. We subsume the part into the whole, that's all. The only problem we have with that is getting rid of the squishy bits afterwards. Staff shuddered slightly. Separate entities, he reminded himself.
Okay,
he said.
I'm all clear on that one, and you've done a thorough audit, and you've worked that out. Where it all went wrong is with finance making a cock-up with the son at that time, and now you're in a position to nail him once and for all. Is that it?
The air was becoming thick with yellow smoke, and there was an offensive smell of brimstone. Ganger nodded. We shall make a full report, he said, and we'll make it stick, because we've got a witness. We shall recommend that he be redeployed in our department. And Ganger licked his lips noisily.
That's fine,
Stuff replied, looking away.
The only thing is, you seem to have lost your witness.
Not quite, Ganger said, and his voice wasn't a voice anymore so much as the buzzing of a million flies. In fact, he's right where he ought to be.
Is that so?
Indeed. Staff tried not to look, as the shape which had been Ganger turned out to be an illusion of a solid body created by a huge swarm of flies in close formation. Narrators know, ew, don't like flies. Lived in so many hot countries, flies, no. I mean, we could go on a whole thing about the various insects, which I don't like, but it's mainly flies and moths and slugs. I digress. Flies, especially the ones they've got big bums and they go bonking against the window. Don't like them. Right, you never know where they've been. Well, in fact, you do know where they've been, and that's why you don't like them. We're better. Rather than go to all the trouble and expense of arresting him and arranging for him to be delivered to the seat of judgment under armed escort, why not just persuade him to go there himself? You learn little wrinkles like that when you're
And all that mucking about,
Staff said, leaning forward until his head was in the centre of the swarm.
All that trying the poor girl out in various departments and so forth, that was just to lure him into the trap.
Certainly not. That would have been pretty inefficient. We think she's ideal for the job, don't you?
Which job?
Don't ask me, Rosa said. 20 years in catering, and suddenly he decides he wants to be a monk. A monk, she repeated. Can you beat it? The County Palatine exchanged glances with the Count of the Saxon Shore. It's a phase he's passing through, said the County Palatine, and even in monasteries they've got to eat, you know. Rosa stared for a moment. You know, she said, I think you guys are as crazy as my crazy brother. I'll get you the check. She walked away. The electors looked at each other.
Pity, the Lord High Cardinal said. That Rocco, maybe he makes a lousy emperor, but give him a pound of mozzarella and a bucket of anchovies and you're in business. And the profiteroles,
groaned the County Palatine.
Don't forget the profiteroles.
I mean, said the Count of the Saxon Shore.
Charlemagne, yes. Joseph, yes. But could they do you tagliatelle verde that's absolutely al dente and still give you a chance and a change out of $20? Like, girl, they're good.
The Lord High Cardinal nodded sadly.
Still, he said, there it is.
He glanced down at his watch, and a strange-looking watch it was at that. Where your watch has hands, his had eyes.
Hey, we'd better shoot.
He picked up the bill and signed it.
So long, Rosa, he called out. Our best to Rocco. Tell him to say one for us.
He stood up, emptied the toothpick glass into his pocket, and led the way. I see, Jane said. We were brought here.
Yes, miss.
Just so as to bring him here.
That's right, miss.
George extended a largely non-existent arm and took firm hold of the carry-cot.
And your friend, of course. He's our star witness, you see, miss.
I see, Jane repeated. George hesitated and bit the whirling expanse of nothingness that would have been his lip.
I expect you're a bit upset, miss, what with the way you've been treated and everything. Only to be expected if you are, miss, if I may say so.
Jane shrugged. You'd have thought so, she said, but I'm not really. Or at least I am, but you see, all my life I've really wanted to know what was going on and why it's all such a mess. And now I'm beginning to see, or at least I think I am.
That's some spirit, miss, said George. Now, can I just see your passports a minute, please?
Jane nodded and produced them. After a moment's perusal, George handed them back to her, and they were both open. Jane's passport had her name and her photograph, and the rather embarrassing bit where it says about any distinguishing marks, the bit she tended to keep her thumb over whenever possible. Bjorn's, however, had a name and a photograph, but Bjorn took it from her and grinned sheepishly.
When these lads say undercover, he explained, boy, do they mean deep cover?
He reached up into his face and pulled. Jane gave a little scream and then opened her eyes. Bjorn was holding a limp rubber mask in his hand and grinning. Only his name was not Bjorn, of course. Just one question, she asked. Why Bjorn?
Because,
Bjorn replied and shrugged.
I happened to see it on the back of a packet of cornflakes, and if you must know,
and thank you, Jane said bitterly. Serves me right for asking, I suppose. Because what Bjorn's passport gave us his name was, in fact, Gabriel, and what Jane really wanted most of all right now was somewhere where she could be sick in a reasonable bit of privacy. James was eating him.
It wasn't easy for the lad, George was saying. Personality surgery, all that sort of thing. Very proud of him we are, back in the department.
Jane turned on him furiously. Oh, yes, she said. And what department would that be? There was a puff of yellow smoke.
Right, said the General. We go in, we zap everything that moves, we rescue the hostage, we come out again. All clear so far?
The spectral warriors nodded uneasily. That was not what was worrying them.
And afterwards, continued the General, we have a full kit inspection for the survivors, if there are any survivors, that is. Do I make myself clear?
There was a murmur of assent from the spectral warriors, and then they shuffled into battle formation, ready for the attack. Despite the mechanical precision of their combat drill, there was a certain amount of unseemly pushing and shoving for places in the front rank and other positions of maximum danger. Although spectral warriors naturally tend to think of survival as something that only happens to other people, there was no point taking unnecessary risks.
On the command, charge, the General snarled. Charge, understood? Understood, Chief. That's fine. Now then, boys.
The word froze on his lips as a door, which hadn't been there a few seconds ago, opened and a figure in uniform came through it. Now, spectral warriors are trained in destruction rather than maths, but they can count pips, and the newcomer had more pips on his shoulders than you expect to find in a fruit juice factory. He strolled along the line and stopped, about 3 yards away from the General, who, for his part, seemed to have frozen solid.
Stand easy, men,
murmured the newcomer, and the overhead strip lighting gleamed on the gold lace of his epaulette and the peak of his cap. The odd thing about his cap was the fact that it had 2 neat round holes in it just above his ears for the horns to go through. With a tremendous effort, the General opened his mouth, but nothing came out except a few woodlice and rather laid-back-looking spider.
Arrest that man,
said the newcomer.
Come on, look lively about it.
67 spectral warriors were suddenly very, very, very happy. The world stopped. It didn't come to an end, of course. It just simply stopped. The sun jerked to a halt in mid-air and hung there, its engine idling. The earth seized on its axis, but without the juddering crash there should have been, as so much inertia suddenly found itself with nowhere to go. There was a general paralysis of clocks, water stood still in rivers, winds evaporated, entropy's meter stopped running, raindrops hung in the air like astronauts in zero gravity. Except, of course, in New York, where they always have to be different. Anyone looking very closely indeed would have detected some movement there, but only a tiny amount. The majority of the citizens were caught in the general freeze-frame effect, but there was a small party of rather fat men strolling up 36th Street with their hands in their pockets. 3 of them were smoking really big cigars. They weren't in any obvious hurry. At the corner of 36 and Broadway, they stopped and waved. A yellow cab without wheels floated noiselessly over the top of the motionless traffic and pulled in to the curb. Metal steps extended themselves to a sidewalk level, and the fat men climbed aboard. The cab pulled away, drifting at the speed of, say, rather slow gondola, and slowly climbed up into the sky until it was lost amongst the clouds. By an oversight of the sort which was only to be expected given the overall level of efficiency of the administration in general, there was another tiny cell of people left awake and functioning during the general shutdown. They were sitting in an office in Wall Street when it happened. 2 men and a girl. The girl was the first to speak. "Darren," she said quietly, "I think it's the end of the world. What will we do?" The man called Darren thought for a moment.
"You sure about that?"
he said. "Jesus Christ, Darren," the girl yelled back. "Just come to the window and look for yourself." Slowly Darren put down his telephone, stood up and walked to the window. Years in Wall Street had trained him to analyse situations immediately.
"Yep," he said. "It's the end of the world, all right."
He sighed, then he strode back to his desk again.
"Okay, guys," he said, "let's get to it."
"So?" the other man shouted. "So what do we do?"
Darren smiled. "Sell," he said. Basically,
the Lord High Cardinal summed up,
we find you guilty as charged of, what was it? Tony, where are my goddamn reading glasses? I'm as blind as a bat without... Of gross negligence, failure to disclose material information, mismanagement, misappropriation of funds, and, hey, what's that? I can't read your writing. Yeah, being guilty. You have heard the testimony of Mr. Gabriel. Have you anything to say?
The accused, formerly head of the Finance and General Purposes Committee, mumbled inarticulately, but said nothing. The 6 layers of insulating tape over his mouth may have had something to do with it, of course.
No. Sure. Well, okay then. I guess that just leaves the sentence. Any thoughts on a sentence, guys?
There was a brief exchange of whispers on the podium. Then the Lord High Cardinal leaned back in his chair, straightened the white bands at his neck, which looked very like a napkin tucked into his collar if you look closely, and set his features in a judicial expression.
Opinion,
he said, drumming his fingers on the desk in front of him,
is a bit divided here. Tony says, strip your lungs out with a plastic fork. Louis says no. That's too good for a scumbag like you. You ought to be shoved down the toilet along with the alligators until you've learned your lesson. And my learned friend, the Count of the Saxon Draw... Yeah, well, anyway, I disagree.
There was absolute silence in court. 67 spectral warriors stood as still as rock-hewn statues, their faces behind their masks bathed in silly grins.
Personally,
continued the Lord High Cardinal,
I say, so what? Everybody makes mistakes now and again.
He frowned.
The point is, he added savagely, only losers get found out. Hey, Tony, where's that stupid cap thing? No, not that Dumbo. That's somebody's sock. Right, now then, where were we?
The other accused wailed and waved his hands and feet in the air. Nobody took any notice. When it comes to changing the nappies of the guiltiest creature on God's earth, there are no volunteers.
This court, said the Lord High Cardinal, sentences the 2 of you as follows. You first, stand up.
The erstwhile general was lifted to his feet. He made a mooing noise against the tape, but no one heard.
By the special request of the prosecuting advocate, intoned the Lord High Cardinal, and in recognition of your special talents in the field of administration and public relations, you are to be assigned to the staff of the prosecuting department.
The Lord High Cardinal winced.
Hey, that's inhuman. Oh well, never mind. As for you, somebody lift the kid up so he can hear, all right? As for you, since you have temporarily taken up residence in the body of a mortal, this court... Say, who thought this one up? It's wicked. This court has no jurisdiction over you. You will therefore be deported back to the world to live as a mortal.
The Lord High Cardinal grinned.
In Kansas City, he added.
Then he turned to his closest colleague and winked.
Okay, Tony, he said. Does that beat the plastic fork idea or what?
There was a scuffle, and the 2 accused were taken away. The Lord High Cardinal settled himself more comfortably in his chair. Now, it's not, my chair is actually really comfy. I got it on special offer down to 150 quid. My goodness gracious, it's so comfortable. And took off his black cap.
Which brings us finally, he said, to the last item on today's agenda.
How, you may ask, does the administration work? It doesn't, of course, but supposing it does, there are departments. Each separate department is manned by a permanent staff of officials and is headed by an officer of grade 2 or above. Sounds like the Inland Revenue. The heads of department from the Finance and General Purposes Committee, which passes resolutions for the approval of the College of Electors. It is the job of the electors to turn the recommendations of the committee into draft orders for ratification by the main boss. The main boss, the man himself, numero uno, the top brass, the guy you'd eventually get to see if you absolutely insisted on seeing the manager, the emperor. All perfectly logical, yes? It would be quite wrong, after all, for the real power to lie in the hands of career civil servants who don't even belong to the same category of life form as the people being governed. Now, it's not, it's too close to the mark right now. The main boss inevitably had to be immortal.
The trouble has always been finding the right mortal for the job, and we all know how we feel about that one. Many centuries ago, the electors hit on the clever idea of not actually telling the emperor what his job consisted of. They didn't lie to him, of course, perish the thought, but they were distinctly parsimonious with the truth. To begin with, they did at least tell him that he was the emperor, without going into all the tedious details of what the job description actually entailed. But even that little snippet of information caused severe problems, so they got into the habit of making sure that when they told him, he wasn't actually listening. In practical terms, it worked, up to a point. It was intended as a temporary measure only. Now, in the last 100 years or so, the emperor has been encouraged to keep a low profile. Rocco VI, as already noted, made pizzas. His immediate predecessor, Wang XIV, nobody laugh at that one, it means king, thank you, ran a small bicycle repair workshop in the back streets of Hong Kong, right opposite the best Cantonese restaurant in the colony. Neville III, better known to history as Neville the Magnificent, had a paper round outside Macclesfield and did a little window cleaning on the side, strictly cash in hand. Joseph the 39th Nakoba carved little wooden elephants. Gupta the 9th moonlighted as a petrol pump attendant and was one of the few emperors ever to abdicate as a result of an irreconcilable difference or conflict of interests. Francois XXIII spent his entire reign in a room 9 feet by 5, firmly convinced that he was a ratchet screwdriver. He was, everyone agrees, one of the better 20th century emperors. Rocco, Wang, I tell you, stop laughing. Neville, Joseph, Gupta and Francois were the successes. The rest were not quite so hot. The worst, probably, was Wei XI, whose 5-hour reign was the second shortest in imperial history. It wasn't the elector's fault, of course. The first they knew about his disastrous latent tendencies was when he put up the Greenpeace poster in the front window of his tiny flat in downtown Brisbane. The shortest reign on record was that of Everton I, who was deemed to have abdicated when he missed an easy chance at slip of Courtney Walsh. The great problem facing the electors is that only the true emperor is going to be any good at the job. And the one and only qualification for being emperor is being the heir apparent by right of birth. That was why Rocco VI was originally chosen, but further inquiries revealed him to be nothing but a distant cousin of the rightful heir. It was the discovery of the true identity of Charlemagne's closest living relative that set in train the whole sequence of events. Because this time things were going to have to be slightly different. Even temporary measures have to come to an end eventually. It was obvious who Rocco's successor was going to be, but this time there would have to be a little vocational training beforehand. Now, it's not pretty much freaking essential, at least civics, because the next reign was going to be the crucial one. It's at one point I can't even. Tom Holt could see the future. Tom Holt is the Nostradamus, the modern day. And you will by now have guessed what Jane looks like. Straight nose, strong jaw, the distinctive high cheekbones familiar from 100 imperial portraits, and you won't need telling what her second name, the name that appears on her passport, is Habsburg. Oh, said Jane, fancy that. The world, which had stopped, started again. Starting implies a beginning. Maybe it's just a cheapskate verbal trick, but we will repeat it to let the true significance sink in. The world started again. Nobody noticed, of course, apart from a few market makers in New York who suddenly realised that they'd sold everything 3 minutes before the most colossal upward swing the markets had ever experienced. Ha ha, to all those city boys in finance. Meh, thumb my nose at them. By the time the market stopped rising, staggered helplessly, and then quite simply ceased to exist, they'd all pinned letters of resignation to their chairs and gone off to Wisconsin to make new lives for themselves as raffia weavers, and so never knew how right they'd actually been. Now, starting implies a beginning. Within 10 minutes, things were already very different. The sun moved along its inevitable course. The grass grew, the rain fell. Time ticked, gravity pulled, history coagulated. The tides rose and fell, men and women tripped and blundered their way through the darkened china shop of human existence. On the wall of Plato's cave, nobody noticed the brand new notice asking the last person to leave to make sure that the lights were switched off. But that was because, somehow or other, it had been there all the time. What was different was that it was doing it all by itself. There was nobody running it. It was just happening. "Hey," said Ganga in the back of Jane's mind. "You can't do this. Just stop it at once." "Why not? I'm the Empress, aren't I? I can do what the hell I like." Ganga howled as his fingers started to lose their grip on the projecting shelf of subconscious that he was desperately clinging to. "But it won't work," he shouted. "There's got to be somebody to run things or they won't work. They won't run themselves, you know." "Won't they? We'll soon see about that." What Ganga meant to say was, maybe they will work for a while if you give the sun and the moon and the earth and rain and wind and time and all that sort of thing some kind of semi-sentience, but who's actually going to supervise it and fix it and put it all back on course if it all starts to go wrong? Now, I suppose you'll say you will, but you're mortal. You won't be around forever, and so you'll have to train a successor, and that won't be easy, believe me. Oh, no. But since it's impossible to say anything at all if you've just suddenly ceased to be, he only got so far as what staff, the electors, and the rest of them said is unrecorded, which is probably just as well. It's unlikely to have been anything nice. And then, with a sigh like the switching off of 100 million computer screens, the great army of celestial officers, functionaries, administrators, schedule clerks, programmers, and time servers faded away into the air from which they had originally come. And after them, their offices, their desks, their files, their hardware, their software, the memory of their existence, until all that was left was one bright, golden paperclip, spinning and sparkling in the upper air, falling or rising weightlessly into the sublime emptiness which is all that remains when order has finally been tidied away. And Jane thought, right then, got that sorted. It should work fine now. I could murder a glass of orange juice. And in her mind, something said, no, not orange juice. You'll get indigestion. Think what happened the last time you had orange juice on an empty stomach. But it never got any further, because a moment later it too was sucked away, to its great surprise, and Jane was left alone, definitively alone, with her thoughts. And finally, the Empress saw everything that she had sorted out, and behold, it was no worse than she'd expected, all things considered. And the evening and morning were the 6th day. And on the 7th day, she ended the work which she had made, and she rested, or at least she tried to rest. But all the milk in the fridge had gone off because of a power cut, and none of the shops were open because it was a Sunday. The sun rose. Now, being nothing more than a dollop of burning gas, it had no way of knowing that it was bang on schedule, right on course, and in exactly the right place at precisely the right time. Because nobody was watching. The slight movement on the face of the waters as the first organism twitched into life went completely unnoticed. No reception committee, no ribbon to cut, no brass band, nothing. Because nobody was taking notes or filing reports to the appropriate quarters. The flawlessness of the sun's landing and the seamless interface of day and night were completely wasted. Because it was nobody's responsibility and nobody's fault. The very first living cell was completely alone as it jerked open the window of its consciousness and let out the primordial scream of birth. But it screamed nevertheless, and screamed again and again, and then it waited. There was no reply. There were sounds, the lapping of the waves, the sighing of the wind, the soft grinding of tectonic plates, the distant echoes of the scream itself, wrapping themselves dog-lead-like around the poles and drifting back. But there was nobody to hear them, except for one lonely consciousness. It waited. It screamed again. It listened. Splash, squish, swish, sigh, crunch, kiss. Nothing. Now, when you're feeling uncertain and apprehensive, and you're not 100% sure you should be here anyway, there's nothing quite so beneficial to morale as a good old sing-song. There was a small embarrassed cough, and then a reedy, squeaky, but grimly determined voice began to sing. "Your son has got this on you.
Hip, 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 hooray!
It was a very small voice, still. Small voice, an infinitesimal voice alone in an infinite sea.
The sun has got descended.
It repeated firmly.
Silence.
A few yards away, something stirred. The movement was so tiny that even if there had been anyone to see, they'd have missed it. But it stirred, and it listened, and it became alive, and it sang.
The sun has got his hat on, he's coming out today.
But that was that. There was no going back from here. The continents braced themselves, contorting their rocky coastlines into sheepish grins. They were going to be needed after all. So when the next dawn came, not one, but many voices, soprano, alto, contralto, tenor, baritone, bass, flat, thin, loud and soft, many millions of voices were raised to greet it, and they sang, "Here comes the sun, little darling, here comes the sun. It's all right." And the evening and the morning were the 8th day. Da-dun! Ta-da! Ta-da! Right. Please excuse my singing in that one. It's a bit difficult to do multiple different voices when you're singing. Yes. So, I still want to do some KJ Parker. Because we're definitely doing Flying Dutch next, but I think after that we'll have to do KJ Parker, which is Tom Holt pseudonym, because I like the and of course it's got Robert Rankin. Of course, we've always got Robert Rankin, but there's DC Farmer as well, who's quite awesome. We've got Terry Pratchett, but I can't do Terry Pratchett. Let's have a look. Savers Corax captures the castle. Let's have a little look-see and have a little bit of a learn. From one of the most original voices in fantasy comes a heroic tale of honour, friendship and battlefield salvage. It's important to look after your crew when you're in the battlefield salvage business. It's stressful work at the best of times, and although your employees are unlikely to be happy, it makes sense to keep them alive. So, when Savers Corax, and it's finished off there, so, hold on. Why doesn't it not give me the rest of it? Hold on. So when Savers Corax finds himself having to capture a castle to stop his men from being killed, he has no choice but to give it a try. Needless to say, the conventional rules of siegecraft are unlikely to be followed. So tell me, what do you think of that one as well? That's book 2 of 3, so it's the Corax trilogy. So number 1 would be Savers Corax Deals with the Dead, which is a title which I can quite happily get behind. I'm looking forward to that. So before we do go on to the next one, because obviously, Flying Dutch is actually, but we can also do this in conjunction. So I'm going to download a sample and see if I can read that as well. But we can do this one sort of like side by side. We can do 2, or I can do Robert Rankin side by side, just so we can buff things up a little bit. And I know I've been struggling for the start of the year, but I've had a cold. Life generally has been absolutely pants, but otherwise things are okay. Oh, hold on a minute. Please excuse me. See, I'm still getting over a cold. It's like, I can't stop recording again. Meh. Right, so Flying Dutch, absolutely definitively. Savers Corax Deals with the Dead by KJ Parker. What do you think? Should we do that as well? Me? Or should we just do the one? Or should we do 2 side by side? Or do you prefer them to do one then do another one? Because we've got a whole year to fill up, so we could actually do this one afterwards if you want. It's really up to you, because you are the guys that listen, and you guys to do it for. We are a little community. We are a small community, but we're a little tight community, and everybody's really nice and lovely, and you all deserve big squishies. Big squishies! Right, I'm going to stop waffling on now, because we're at 38 minutes. I'm sure you're bored of my voice by now. So, lovely beans, if you are too cold, please snuggle up and wrap up warm in a fleecy blankie, and have a cup of cocoa or hot chocolate or coffee, or cocoa or hot chocolate. They are different things. Or coffee or tea. Go with tea, because the tea's always the best, definitely. And I've got to say, I'm still going on about this chair, and I'm still going on about this cup warmer, because it's the best. I've got one downstairs in the kitchen now, I've got one in the bedroom, I've got 3 of them now. Keep your cup of tea hot, and the longest I've had is keep it hot for 4 hours. One cup of tea lasted me 4 hours when I used to drink a cup of tea an hour, sometimes 2. Anyway, lovely beans. If you're too hot, hydrate. If you're too cold, keep warm. Most of all, keep safe. Talk to you soon, Petal. I appreciate you.